by 1996 we were upgraded to a statutory body through an act of parliament. And we were set up to foster what we call constitutional democracy through the raising of civic consciousness in the context of what we call democratic good governance. And for today, we want to give a short talk on what we've titled Enhancing the Right Civic Culture in Sierra Leone. The title again of this short talk is Enhancing the Right Civic Culture in Sierra Leone. What's the title of this talk?
Enhancing the Right Civic Culture in Sierra Leone.
Now this is what we're going to do. We're going to answer the following questions, even as we talk on this subject. Number one, we want to know what is civic culture. Number two, we want to answer the question, do we as a nation have the right civic culture? Number three, we want to look at what constitutes the right civic culture. And number four, we want to talk about the institutions that enhance this right civic culture. And we'll look for examples in other countries within the continent and outside the continent. And we'll talk about how we're going to enhance this civic culture, and we'll end with the benefits of having the right civic culture. Are you coming along with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's start with the first question. What is civic culture? We said by our topic that we want to enhance the right civic culture. But let's start by answering the question, what is civic culture? According to studies that have been done, and according to books that have been written, they are saying that civic culture focuses attention on the relationship between those that are called the governors and we who are the governed. And this is in the context of what we call civic duties. So everybody is involved. As long as you are a citizen of the state, you are involved in what is happening. It is either you are part of the governors or you are part of the governed. So that relationship that exists between those two categories of people, but that relationship is defined within the context of civic duties. There are certain things that we must do as citizens, certain things that we must not do as citizens of a particular country. Are we citizens of Sierra Leone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, of course, the answer to that, why am I a citizen, we'll leave it for some other discussion. But for today, we are saying that civic culture is characterized by what? Our acceptance of the authority of the state and the belief in participation in what we call civic duties. That is what the civic culture is. But to break it down further, we can say civic culture is synonymous with political culture, or what you can call the democratic culture. And from again studies that have been done, they have divided civic culture into three categories. Let's don't forget, even as we talk about that relationship between the governors and the governed, in the context of civic duties, we are looking at three categories of civic culture. The first is what is called the parochial civic culture. What is the first category?
Parochial civic culture.
The second category of civic culture is called the subject civic culture. What is the second?
Subject civic culture.
And the third is the participant civic culture. What is the third?
Participant civic culture.
Okay? Now, those are the three broad categories. And we are saying we must enhance the right civic culture in our country. Now, From studies looking at what obtains in our country, Sierra Leone, people are saying that we practice more of the first and the second. That is the parochial and the subject. But the third category is the right category in terms of the right civic culture, what we must have, what we must practice if our democracy is to work. So for the first category, that is called the parochial civic culture, in that kind of arrangement, the citizens are not interested in what the governors do. Everybody goes about his business. Whether things go well or not, it's not their business. We say those citizens, they fall under what we call the parochial civic culture. And that is not the kind of civic culture that we must practice. Are we in agreement?
Yes, sir.
So they don't care. For the second category, they understand the workings of government, but they see the leaders as masters, as lords. We must not ask them questions. We must not bother ourselves with what they are doing. We must just answer to them, yes, master. Yes, madam. That is what obtains in the subject civic culture. But in the participant civic culture, the citizens are aware. They know that there should be a fine relationship between those that are governors, our leaders, and they who are the governed, the subject. And they believe they must contribute to the proper governance of the state. I know we all want to be in that category, true or false? So what we are saying to you this afternoon is that as citizens of Sierra Leone, we must aspire towards the participant civic culture. We must not aspire towards the parochial or the subject, but rather we must be fully involved. So then, what are the various elements? What do we take into consideration when we consider the right civic culture that we say is the participant civic culture? What are the various elements? First of all, let's put everything in perspective. As we talk about the right civic culture, which is the participant civic culture, we can put them under these categories. Number one, we must have the right civic and peace culture in the country. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
Category number one, we must have the right peace culture. Category number two, we must have the right political culture. Category number three, we must have the right democratic culture. Category number four, we must have the right human rights culture. Category number five, we must have the right voter or electoral culture. Category number six, we must have the right development culture. And category number seven, we must have the right perspective on gender issues. So these are the broad outlines, even as we talk about the right civic culture in Sierra Leone, which comes under the participant civic culture. But now let's take the talk one step further. Even as we've identified 7 broad categories, let's look at the issues under those categories. Number one, we must maintain the right attitude as good citizens. Attitude is everything. When you come to school, when you are in your community, wherever you find yourself, in public as well as in private, you must maintain what? The right attitude. And number two, even as we open up the perspectives, we are saying that we must uphold the principles of non-violence. These days, among young boys and girls, there is so much violence. You might have heard recently a girls' school went to stadium and they had their school sports. What happened? It turned into violence. Yes. And I know the same will not be said about girls' high school. Yes. Honor before honor. Okay? So that should not be said about people who make that declaration. Also, we must ensure what we call mutual respect and tolerance. You are in a group. Let's take the class situation. Everybody should be given the opportunity to express their views in class without making the person look funny or stupid. And that is what is mutual respect, that is what is tolerance. And even as we say that for the classroom situation, we expect to see it across the length and breadth of the nation. And we notice that politicians, for most of the time, they don't see eye to eye. They don't want to listen to the next person. But we must be determined, as the young ones growing up, to say, when it is our turn, we are going to ensure that we show respect for the others, that we ensure mutual tolerance and respect. Are we ready for that? Yes, sir. Okay? By the way, let me say this to you. I am coming from the other side of you. I attended the Methodist Boys High School. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Additionally, we must obey law and order. Any society without law and order is a society that will not make progress. True or false? So as you are coming up, going through school, one day soon you are going to replace us. You must remember that no matter what happens, we must do what? Obey law and order. Can somebody say that for us? We must ensure that there is transparency. We must ensure that there is accountability. We must ensure that we operate in integrity, and we must avoid all forms of greed. Added to that, we want to make our society and our government responsive to the needs of the states. Did somebody hear that? Yes, sir. We must make our society responsive to the needs of the people. When I go to the hospital, the nurses and the doctors must be ready to treat me without delay. Yes. When I come to school, I must get the services that I deserve, based on the agenda that we are following. Wherever I go, people must be willing and ready to serve me. It is not until I pay a bribe. But that is what we see around for most of the time. And as young people coming up, we must make a determination to say, when it is our time, we are going to change the status quo. Through us, the narrative must change. Are we together? Yes, also, we must be ready to uphold what we call the rule of law. Earlier on, we were talking about obeying law and order. But if we don't uphold the rule of law, law and order will just be a thing of the mouth. People will just pay lip service to it. So we must do what? Uphold the rule of law. Sierra Leone is a nation governed by law, and therefore every strata of society must be ready to uphold the laws of the land, the constitution, and every act of parliament. We must first of all know them before we can uphold them. How many of us are interested in knowing the laws of the land? And how many of us have made some efforts to know the laws of the land? Okay? Also, we must respect the human rights and freedoms of others. Everybody, including you, you have rights and freedoms that you must enjoy. And within a democratic culture, within the right civic culture, you must be allowed to enjoy them. Are we together? Yes. And also, in this kind of civic culture that we are talking about, we must ensure inclusive governance. And we must work on what we call consensus. It's not just one set of people that will say, this is what is good for everybody. We must make sure that when we decide on what is good for everybody, everybody has a say in it. Are we together? Yes, we must also acknowledge our responsibilities to the state. How many of us are familiar with the payment of taxes? At a certain age, we're expected, for instance, to pay local tax. And there are several other taxes that we must pay. That is our duty as a citizen of the country. Otherwise, you don't have any business condemning anybody if anything goes wrong. But when you pay your tax and you own up to other responsibilities in the state, you are a good citizen and you can ask for the government to be accountable. Is somebody understanding what I'm saying? Okay? Added to that, we are saying that we must foster the responsible use of our public and private spaces. Some people publicly they do things that are out of the way. You see somebody will go to one corner of the school and urinate there. Is that the right thing to do? No. We see adults walking the streets of Freetown and they will just go to any corner and just mess up the place. Is that the right thing to do? No. When it is your turn, will you do that kind of thing? No. So we must realize that we have the responsibility to know how to use both the public and the private space. And also, we must endeavor to popularize volunteerism and work on what we call self-help initiatives. You see, when you come to school and there are bits on the ground and your principal or the teacher says to you, pick it up, what they are doing is to teach you to volunteer to keep your community clean. So that when you grow up and become an adult, it becomes part of you. That if there is a problem in my community, I can come in, I can volunteer and ensure that the problem is fixed. We must ensure equity and we must foster non-discrimination. We all come from different backgrounds, but we are all Sierra Leoneans and we are all created by God. So therefore nobody should discriminate against the other person. That is what we must imbibe in this right kind of civic culture that we call the participant civic culture. We must foster the right work ethics. Even in the classroom, when you are given tasks to do, you should do it right. You don't have to cheat. You don't have to be involved in examination malpractice. Because if you start doing that now, that is what will transfer when you become an adult to the workplace. So you must guard against that. As I round up, I want to say to you that there are several things that we can do to become good citizens. Several things that we must do to ensure our nation develops. Most of the time, we turn attention to others and we say it is their responsibility to do the right thing. But all of us, we have a responsibility to do the right thing. And so I say to you, if you must get it right, you must ensure that you avoid anything that is inimical to the growth of the nation, anything that will prevent others from doing well. And one aspect is that we must avoid what we call tribalism, regionalism. Whatever it is, we must try to avoid it. Because in Sierra Leone, we are all supposed to be one. We are all supposed to be united. It is one Sierra Leone that we are. And if we keep it that way, it will be better for you, it will be better for those coming after you. And Sierra Leone will be a great nation. There is so much to say, but I think I must stop now. Thank you, God bless you. Here we have a few civic education materials, but of course we cannot distribute it to everybody. We'll hand it over to the principal and she'll put it in the library. When you come to the library, you will have the opportunity to look through it and understand more of what we've said. And even the notes that we prepared, we'll also send it to the school. So if you are interested in knowing more about the right civic culture, you can always come to the library. So on behalf of the Executive Chairman of the National Commission for Democracy, it is my honor and pleasure to hand over these civic education materials to the principal of the Methodist Girls High School. Honor. Laboramos. Thank you.
It is only a good individual that can promote a good family, and good families make up a good community, and eventually a good society, and a perfect Sierra Leone. The change has to start with us. We have to comport ourselves, we live peaceably with everybody, we take care of the environment, and then we will move forward. So we thank them very much for this education. These are going to be put in the library. Make sure you use them. Yes. Okay. Thank you.